Chapter 148 Changes. Recurring trigger warning. This fic will be dealing with narratives of PTSD manifesting in depression and paranoia. Packing, it seemed, did not in fact distract Ariadne. If anything, it instead set her watching everyone else in the dorm like an omnidirectional hawk as she idly wrapped her dusty firebolt in paper and sat it along her bed. It was as if everyone forgot that not only could she sense shape thanks to her spell, but also behind her, as she caught pitying look after pitying look. Hermione was a lot more subtle about it, but even she had been shooting Ariadne worried glances as Ariadne carefully laid the glowing dragonhide robes atop her clothes in her trunk. Was that everything? Ariadne frowned as she methodically checked through all the drawers. All empty. She could have sworn she'd forgotten something, so she knelt down to check if she'd missed any of the few things she stored under her bed. No, nothing. She had her clothes. Her books had all been laid flat at the bottom of the trunk. Her cauldron was accounted for. Her supply of potions was already in her bag. Just what was missing? Shaking her head and deciding she was imagining it, Ariadne let the lid of the trunk fall down with a loud clunk and did up its latches. It was definitely a little heavier than it had been when she'd last unpacked it, most of a year before. Why did she have to be thrown into all of it? It wasn't fair. She hadn't done anything to deserve her life chucked back and forth by every evil the wizarding world had to offer. To be entered into the Triwizard Tournament against her will, to have been used in a ritual to bring back the very man she was unwittingly famous for having supposedly ended as a toddler, before she could even remember. She hadn't asked for any of it. It was the story she never needed of her life. The mysteriously left niece of the Dursleys was all she had needed, was all the explanation she had cared about. But the scar on her forehead and the words of Professor McGonagall on Hermione's 11th birthday had turned her life upside down without even asking if she wanted it. Why did they have to pull her into their war? I wish the ring had never come to me, Ariadne thought wryly. Somehow, Gandalf's words about living in such times rang hollow in her mind as she solemnly dragged her trunk down the stairs, carefully shifting to make sure she knew exactly where each stair was. She didn't want to be at the center of such times. She didn't want to be the girl who lived. She just wanted to be Ariadne Granger. Was it so much to ask for her to be allowed to just do her exams? To just learn? To just go to school? It just so happens that she couldn't just be Ariadne Granger. Not when the same evil wizard who'd killed her birth parents now ran rampant. No, the wizarding world had decided her fate before she'd even known it existed. Ariadne straightened quizzically as she reached the common room landing, finding that standing on the balcony, frowning morosely, was Professor Dumbledore. Dumbledore turned to face her as she stood numbly in the doorway, before a second-year girl had to get past him. Ariadne shuffled awkwardly over to the headmaster. I always thought this landing should have had carpet. Don't you agree? Dumbledore asked idly. I often came down here at night barefoot. The stone was always cold, he said. Sleepwalking, of course, he said hurriedly. Most likely a lie. Dumbledore grimaced. I put you in terrible danger this year, Ariadne. I'm sorry. Yes, you did, Ariadne thought as she nodded. Story of my life. Professor? Ariadne mumbled, expressionlessly. What's going to happen now? She asked quietly. A great many things, Ariadne, Dumbledore replied. Very few of them good. But you ought not to concern yourself with them just yet. You have gone through a terrible year, and that is my fault. I should never have allowed you to compete in the tournament. And the rest, Ariadne muttered, too quiet to be heard, and in fact so quietly her lips barely moved. Dumbledore sighed. Dark and difficult times lie ahead. Soon, we all must face the choice between what is right and what is easy, he told her, before looking away almost in shame. Ariadne, 12 years ago I failed to make that choice. I do not deserve your forgiveness for that failure, he said quietly, leaning on the railing before gently putting a hand on her shoulder. But remember this. You have friends here. You are not alone. Ariadne smiled reluctantly and nodded, even as her mind struggled to figure out what to say. Unfortunately, I must leave you. Getting out word of Lord Voldemort's return is proving to be disturbingly difficult. Do try to enjoy your holiday. Worry not of these terrible things. What about the memory? Ariadne asked, frowning confusedly at the man's back. Dumbledore turned back to her, sighing darkly. The minister is loath to accept it as evidence of anything but a conspiracy, Dumbledore hissed. Your magic sense rendered the memory incomprehensible. I was forced to alter it in order to salvage your hearing. As a result, the minister refuses to accept it as legitimate and is intimating that it is a complete fabrication, he grumbled. Ariadne folded in on herself a little, exhaling in frustration. You know, Ariadne, I'm almost surprised you have never dabbled in the use of a pensive. It seems the sort of thing you would benefit from, if only to enhance your studies. Perhaps you should get one. Perhaps you should get one. Maybe, Ariadne mumbled, shrugging noncommittally. Well, have a good holiday, Miss Granger, he said warmly, before stepping down the stairs to the common room and swooping from Gryffindor Tower purposefully. Horseless, horse-drawn carriages. Should I be surprised? Dennis chuckled, as he helped Ariadne tug her trunk out of the carriage. I suppose you can see what's ever moving it, though, he added, poking Ariadne. They're pulled by Thestrals, Sirius told him, taking the trunk. Hermione jumped at it, just as Ariadne did at the explanation for why she'd always been able to sense them. Of course. Thestrals? Valerie asked quizzically. What are they? They're jet-black carnivorous winged horses. You can only see them if you've seen someone die, Sirius explained, a forlorn look on his face. I haven't been here since before last time, he muttered softly, staring at the Thestral. Ron sniffed loudly before scoffing. Of course, Hermione exclaimed as they began down toward the steam locomotive. I always thought that Ariadne was sensing a horse shape was just an enchantment. I should have realized it might have been a Thestral. The platform was, as usual, a cacophony of students gathering to decide where to sit and bringing their luggage. Students taller and shorter than Ariadne littering the stone structure. Well, far more taller than shorter. Even Ginny was considered short by those around them, and Ginny, walking beside her with a pensive look, was taller than she was. She was glad of Ginny's company as she apprehensively stepped through the crowd, mentally thanking Sirius for handing off her trunk to the porters for her, and they made their way toward the nearest carriage with Ron, Hermione, Sirius, and her parents in tow. Well, this is quaint, Valerie mused as they dipped into the doorway and climbed the little stairs to the hallway. Surprisingly cozy, she added, as Hermione led the group down, checking in windows for an empty compartment as she rubbed the backs of her hands curiously. This takes me back, Sirius said gently as he sat down, and the group packed into the small space. Ginny's hip and waist pressing against Ariadne's as Ron and Sirius sat down beside them. While her parents and Hermione took the other side. Her parents and Hermione took the other side. Crack that open, could you, Ariadne? Bloody hot this year. Ariadne nodded and wordlessly slid the window open as Ginny curled her right arm around her, partially for affectionate reasons and partially because otherwise her arm would have had to exist in the exact same space as Ariadne's left. Oh, thanks, Adney, Ron groaned, relaxing a bit as the gentle wind started filtering in. Lucky it's a new moon right now. I was knackered the last time we took the train. Thank Merlin it wasn't this hot. He's gonna be a bundle of complaints all summer, Sirius said, nudging Ginny. I'll have to see how Ramus is doing. We just had a Muggle air conditioning unit installed at his. Electricity bill's going to go through the roof. Should have seen him on his first time, Ginny chuckled. I swear he was barely conscious. I was, Ron grumbled. I was burning up even with 6 cooling charms in their ice blocks, he said, fanning himself with his hand and pointing to Ariadne and Hermione. Huh, I've been a werewolf for a year, he said whimsically as the train whistled and started moving, grimacing at the sound. Well, you're looking good for it. Remus was pretty sickly at your age, regardless of the moon, Sirius told him, as Ariadne regarded the boy's practically glowing face. Oh, nah, this is just glamours, Ron said dismissively before jumping. I should probably dispel those before we're not allowed to use magic, he muttered, digging his wand out of his pocket to repeatedly flick it up to cause each one to disappear in succession, leaving only the blue shell projected by Ariadne's glasses as Sirius chuckled. Remus could learn a thing or two from you, Ron, Sirius sparked, laughing. Maybe the mentor should be the mentee. Oh yeah, that's more what I remember. 5 years ago, I had no idea magic even existed, Valerie said thoughtfully. Now, my daughter's best friend is a werewolf. How about that? Hermione smiled, leaning forward and ruffling Ron's long, messy hair. Out of the window, the train was moving too quickly for anything to catch Ariadne's glasses long enough for her to acquire any sort of proper image, so the window might as well have been a void to Ariadne as she sat beside it, smiling gently at the conversation before returning to her expressionless contemplations, occasionally glimpsing trees or fields further from the train, far enough that she could sense them before they passed too far behind the train. What do you call a dog that does magic? Dennis asked, smiling and trying to get Ariadne's attention. Ronald Weasley, Hermione immediately replied with a devious smile. Even Ariadne snorted as Ron burst out laughing and her father doubled over in mirth, the whole compartment erupting with laughter as Ariadne curled in on herself a little at the noise. Ginny stopped laughing, taking Ariadne's hand gently and frowning as Dennis spoke up again. I was going to say a labracadabrador, but that's way better, Dennis exclaimed through his own mirth as Sirius looked out at the window as they passed out of a ring of orange light, and as Hermione grinned at satisfaction, her braces peeking out at Ariadne. Well, this labracadabrador is going to have to disappear, Sirius announced, standing up as Ariadne span to face him with a frown on her face. Urgent business. Got to go. Hey, he said, stepping over to Ariadne as Ginny and Ron moved to occupy the space a little more comfortably. I'm sorry to go, but I'll keep in touch as much as I can. All right, Adney? Ariadne nodded, grimacing, before Sirius leaned down and hugged her, his beard tickling her cheek as her curly hair mingled with her own. See you, he said warmly, before a flick of his wand and a crack. He vanished. The ring must have been Hogwarts' apparition ward, Ariadne realized as she jumped at the noise of Sirius's departure. She was no longer under the protective skirts of Hogwarts, ineffective as they had been. That fact still gnawed at her as the train chuffed ever on southward, flashes of blue glowing trees and farmland occasionally greeting her through the window through which a mercifully cool wind blew, blowing her hair all askew as Ginny laughed and batted it out of her face. Oh, come on, Crookshanks. He's perfectly friendly, Hermione chided the chat as he hissed at Ron from her lap. Sorry, he's not normally like this. Wasn't like he liked me much to start with, Ron grumbled humorously. I should probably drop care of magical creatures. Crooks isn't alone. Adney raised an eyebrow idly, agreeing. He'd not done as poorly as he thought he had, but that didn't mean it was an easy subject for him. What would you take instead? Hermione asked as she hoisted Crookshanks up. I don't know. Maybe Muggle studies? Ron pondered, frowning a little. You'd have to take the exam if you wanted to start it in 5th year, Hermione told him. And remember, Professor Burbage's curriculum is more thorough than the old one. Ron shrugged. I suppose that'd be all right. At least an exam won't try to stab me, he chuckled, smiling at Ariadne. What? Hermione exclaimed, leaning forward and letting Crookshanks depart her shoulder and seek the attention of Valerie. What do you mean, stab you? Unicorn. Liked her heaps. Hated me, Ron replied, pointing at Ariadne again, as Dennis frowned slightly before immediately accepting the existence of unicorns. Well, I'd be happy to help you study if you want to take Muggle studies. You should probably owl Professor McGonagall, Hermione offered. I'll think about it, Ron mumbled, as Ariadne let herself lean into Ginny a little, the proximity comforting as Ginny absently draped an arm about her and rubbed her back reassuringly. Ginny's own hair smushing against hers as she leant her head gently toward Ariadne. All right, where would those ministry people we're supposed to be going with be? Dennis mused as they stepped forth from the wall that was platform 9 3/4 into King's Cross Station. As Ariadne hurriedly clipped together her collapsible cane and surreptitiously let her glasses hang from her neck on their chain as they pulsed the station into her sense. They said they'd have a car, so probably in the car park, Valerie replied, as Ariadne slid the ball end of her cane along the ground before her and caught a glimpse of Molly Weasley's core approaching. There you all are, Molly called jovially, spreading her arms as Ron ran over and immediately hugged her. Hey, there's my boy, she cried, squeezing him in her arms. Oh, I love you, Ron, she added, as Ginny patted Ariadne's hand and let go, jogging over to her mother. Hey, Mom, Ginny called. Ginny! And Fred! George! Oh, it's so good to see you all again, Molly exclaimed, hugging Ginny. And the Grangers, lovely to see you. Ariadne waved awkwardly as Molly beckoned them over, before obliging her and scuttling over with the other Grangers. Dennis pushing her trolley. You, young lady, should have told me you two were seeing each other. Or I suppose sensing, Molly cried, making Ariadne blush profusely. Oh, come here, Molly grabbed her, making her seize up anxiously with a hissing breath. Now, I am not against having one more daughter-in-law than I expected, but you'd better earn it, she exclaimed affectionately, letting go of Ariadne. Don't you make me intervene. No, Miss Weasley, Ariadne replied sheepishly, struggling on the most basic of syllables as Ginny hurriedly took her hand back. Leave her alone, Mum, Ginny laughed. Go easy on her. Oh, all right. But you're not sleeping in the same room anymore. Percy's old room is the new spare, Molly replied, setting off on her way and ruffling Ariadne's hair, making Ginny scoff. Hey, we exist, Fred called jovially, earning a gigantic hug from his mother. Oh, not only has Ariadne been wooing little Gin, she also invested 1,000 galleons into Wheezes. She what? Molly exclaimed as the Grangers grinned, and Ariadne went even redder. Well then, I hope you two properly express your gratefulness, she said sternly, as the sweltering heat of the outside sun smothered Ariadne and made her even more pink. She's a stakeholder, George told her. Good, all right. We're parked down there, Molly announced as Ariadne's cane met the blister paving at the crossing. Dennis leaned over and pressed its button. Ariadne glad of her glasses as cars drove by, even as she sensed the magical core of the ministry driver across the car park. Blue and green. Valerie and Dennis had arrived by Portkey, so the Department of International Magical Cooperation had organized transport home for them. All right, well, we'll see you soon, Molly called as she began to walk off. Ariadne awkwardly held her arm out, and Ginny wrapped herself around her. I'll see you around, Adney, Ginny murmured into her ear. Hey, do you want me to come over for your birthday and everything? Ariadne nodded, as Ginny gently kissed her cheek. Okay, I'll bring Ron. Love you, she told her, as Ariadne returned the gesture and kissed Ginny's cheek, her heart fluttering anxiously at the fairly public display of affection. Love you too, Ariadne said, just as Hermione span to her. Ariadne, the crossing's green, Hermione called urgently, as Valerie and Dennis pushed their trolleys noisily across the blister paving and started hesitantly walking over the crossing. Ariadne grumbled as her fingertips lost Ginny's, as she hurriedly followed her family, wishing she'd had longer to say goodbye. Sorry, doesn't look like the buzzer's working. Even with her glasses, it wasn't exactly as if she could sense the color of a crossing light, and it always irritated her when the sound prompt wasn't working. Their maintenance was always neglected. Even so, it did not distract her in the purple-coated yellow, blue, and red core of her girlfriend. Distract her from the purple-coated yellow, blue, and red core of her girlfriend bobbing away and waving gently. See you, Ariadne, Myone, Ron called loudly, waving as he jumped to see over cars. You too, Ron. Ariadne wished she could wave back, but she couldn't explain how she knew she was waving to anyone non-magical, so she let Hermione do the waving for her as she approached the presumably ministry-owned car. Granger family? A man in a long suit called, waving a hand as he stood by the door. Kingsley Shacklebolt. Or, good to meet you, he said warmly, shaking Dennis and Valerie's hands. Shall we get you four home, then? Kingsley seemed a fairly nice individual, as he made small talk with the parents, and they all piled into the deceptively spacious interior of the enchanted vehicle. Its inside was almost limousine-like in proportion. While the boot had been so cavernous, their trunks and various bags had been swallowed easily, unlike the difficulties they often had with their own car. Come late afternoon, Ariadne was glad to be home, even if its surfaces were completely devoid of hers and Hermione's naturally shed magical coating. Everything was as she had left it, and yet Ariadne could not shake her unease. Normality taunted as her memories of curses and Voldemort sparked through her, and she suspected she would get just as little sleep as she had that night as she lay on her bed, only the thinnest of her blankets over herself in the heat, her glasses pulsing away on the bedside table as she struggled to doze off, jumping at every unfamiliar noise and creak of the house. The thrash of a leafy tree outside, the cracking of its twigs, Hermione shuffling about upstairs as she plugged in a fan so as to be able to make use of a weighted blanket. All kept her awake at night as she lay sullenly, pleading with her mind for rest.